Naomi Osaka had just finished her match. She was riding the little cart they use to take players back through the grounds, half listening, winding down the way you do after work. Then she looked over at the practice courts and saw something that made her sit up. One of them was completely packed, not a few people leaning on a fence, full, crowded, rows deep. And here's the detail that makes the story. There was nobody on the court yet. Osaka is a 4-time Grand Slam champion. She has been famous since she was 20. She has seen every kind of crowd this sport produces. And she genuinely could not work out what was happening. In her own words, "I was like, who's practicing right now?" Then she spotted the flags. Blue, red, white, with the sun and the 3 stars. And she said she instantly understood. That is the moment I want you to hold in your head for the next 20 minutes, because it explains everything that is about to happen in New York tonight. A former world #1 at a Grand Slam stopping to ask why an empty practice court had a bigger audience than most actual matches. The answer was Alex Eala, and she hadn't even walked out yet. Tonight, that same young woman walks onto Arthur Ashe Stadium, the biggest tennis court on the planet, 23,500 seats, for the Stars of the Open exhibition against Iva Jovic. 6 o'clock, sold out, and the singles draw for the main tournament lands today as well, which means by the time you're watching this, we may finally know who she plays first. But the story I want to tell you isn't about the draw. It's about the thing nobody in tennis forecast, nobody planned for, and nobody in the sport quite knows how to describe yet. Because a country with almost no tennis history has quietly turned up and taken over the biggest tennis tournament in the world. Let me show you how far this has already gone. Start with the fact that Sky Sports, one of the biggest broadcasters in the sport, has now written the sentence out loud. They called Alex Eala the biggest thing to come out of the Philippines since Manny Pacquiao. Stop and think about what that comparison actually means. Pacquiao wasn't just a boxer, he was a national event. When he fought, the Philippines stopped. Crime rates dropped during his fights because everybody, and I mean everybody, was in front of a television. Streets emptied, malls put up screens. He was, for years, the single most famous Filipino alive. So when a British broadcaster looks at a 21-year-old tennis player and reaches for that comparison, they are not being polite. They're reporting what they can see with their own eyes. And what they can see is this. The Philippines is a basketball country. It's a boxing country. It's a billiards country. Tennis was never on that list. There was no pathway, no tour, no history, no former Grand Slam quarter-finalist to phone for advice. Now the whole nation has tennis fever, and the people who run the sport are watching it happen in real time with slightly stunned faces. Here's the second piece of evidence, and this one comes from someone who has spent her entire life inside the game. Annabel Croft, former British #1, now an analyst. She watched Alex win the Washington title, and this is what she said afterwards. "I've never seen anything like it. The stadium, you could not get a seat. The noise, the excitement levels, and she just takes it all in her stride. I've never seen anything like it." That's not a fan on social media. That's a professional who played on tour, who has commentated on hundreds of tournaments, who has been around this sport for decades. When someone with that much experience tells you they have no reference point for what they just watched, believe them. And then Venus Williams, who partnered Alex in doubles in Germany and again in Toronto, said this: "Alex is a world star. She's just incredible. Besides the fact of her tennis, she's an incredible person, well-spoken, and just an impressive young lady. A world star." From a woman who has won more Grand Slam titles than most countries have produced. Now here's the part that I find most interesting of all, and it comes back to Osaka. Because after she figured out what that packed practice court was about, she didn't get annoyed. She didn't roll her eyes at the noise. She said, and this is a direct quote, "I think it's awesome. It's so cool that she's building a new community, and obviously great for the tournament, because she sells a lot of tickets." Building a new community. That's the phrase that gets to the heart of it. Osaka wasn't describing a loud fan base. She was describing something arriving in tennis that wasn't there before. A whole group of people who were not tennis fans, who are now tennis fans, and who have shown up with their own flags, their own chants, their own jokes, and their own way of doing things. That's not support. That's a new population moving in. And here's the thing about it, that nobody saw coming. It travels. Let me take you through it, because the pattern is genuinely strange once you line it up. Go back to January, at the Australian Open. She practiced on court 22, an outside court, a small one, the kind of place where a handful of curious people usually drift past. Filipino fans filled it, for the entire hour, cheering every winner she hit in practice. Calling out to her, Australian reporters watched it happen and used the word wild and called her a national hero, because they had no other way to describe what they were looking at. That's a practice session, in January, on a side court, on the other side of the world from Manila. Then Wimbledon, where she reached the fourth round and beat the defending champion Iga Swiatek along the way. Filipino fans there too, in the most reserved, most traditional tennis crowd on earth. Then Washington in early August, where she won the whole tournament, and Croft said she'd never seen anything like the stadium. Then Toronto, where the flags were everywhere, Philippine and Canadian side by side. And now New York, where the fans were waiting outside her training session before the tournament had even properly begun. 5 countries, 5 continents worth of travel. Same crowd, every single time. That is the part that makes this genuinely unusual in world sport. Home support is normal. Every athlete gets loud crowds in their own country. What Alex Eala has is away support that behaves like home support everywhere she goes all year round. There are only a handful of athletes on earth who can do that, and almost all of them are men playing team sports. So how is it even possible? The answer is one of the most remarkable things about the Philippines, and it's the reason takeover is the right word for what's coming. Millions of Filipinos live and work outside the Philippines. Nurses in New York and London, caregivers in Hong Kong, Rome, and Dubai, seafarers on ships crossing oceans right now, engineers, teachers, hotel workers, construction workers, doctors. They are, by some measures, one of the most widely spread populations on the planet. Which means that when a Filipino athlete plays anywhere in the world, there is very likely already a Filipino community in that city. Not tourists, residents, people with jobs there, and cars, and Saturdays free. And these communities are extraordinarily well organized, because they've had to be. Church groups, hometown associations, nursing networks, alumni chapters, group chats that have been running for 15 years with hundreds of people in them. So a tennis tournament gets announced, and the message goes out through networks that already existed for completely different reasons. And 2 weeks later, there are 300 people at a practice court on a Tuesday morning. Nobody in tennis planned for that. Nobody could have. It's infrastructure that the sport didn't know was there. Now let's talk about New York specifically, because this is where it goes to another level entirely. The New York area has one of the largest and oldest Filipino communities anywhere outside the Philippines. Queens, where the tournament actually is, Woodside, which is minutes away, Jersey City, right across the river, with an enormous, long-established Filipino population, Long Island, generations of families, many of them working in healthcare, many of them here for 30 or 40 years. And the US Open is in Queens, on the number 7 train, 20-odd minutes from Midtown. For the first time in history, there's a Filipino athlete making history in an individual sport, at the highest level, in a stadium these families can reach on public transport after work. That has never happened before. Pacquiao fought in Las Vegas, on pay-per-view, at 1 in the morning. You watched him at home or in a crowded bar with the sound turned up. This one, you can go to. You can bring your mother. You can bring your kids and let them see it with their own eyes. That's the difference. And that's why I think what's coming over the next 2 weeks will be bigger than anything the sport has seen from this community so far. Let me be honest with you about the other side, though, because there's a real risk here, and I'd rather you hear it from me. It hasn't all gone perfectly this week. On Monday, Alex played her first Grand Slam mixed doubles match, partnering Felix Auger-Aliassime. They drew Elina Svitolina and Gael Monfils, who happened to be married to each other, which is its own lovely bit of tennis trivia, and it went badly. 4-1, 4-1, in the short format they use for that event. Out in the first round on Louis Armstrong Stadium. That's a heavy defeat, and there's no way to dress it up. But I'd take 2 things from it rather than 1. First, mixed doubles at this event is a strange, chaotic sprint. The format is short, The field is packed with superstars, and one bad 10-minute stretch ends your tournament. It tells you very little about singles form. Second, and this matters more, Svitolina is a player Alex beat in Washington on the way to that title, so it's not as if she can't handle that level. Doubles is a different sport with different rhythms, and she's played it at a major exactly once. And there's a bigger worry worth naming. She has played a very heavy season. More than 50 singles matches, deep runs at Wimbledon, in Berlin, in Washington. She went out early in Cincinnati. She's 21, and there's only so much a body can absorb before it starts asking questions. So tonight, when she plays that exhibition on Arthur Ashe, some people will say she should be resting instead. I understand the argument. I just don't think she agrees with it. Because look at how she describes the crowd. Croft made a sharp observation about this. She pointed out that all that noise and expectation would be a burden for a lot of players. Her exact reading was that for some people, it would be pressure, but Alex embraces it. She loves it. That's the crucial detail in this whole story. The takeover only works because the player wants it. There are athletes who would find this suffocating. Thousands of people at your practice. A whole country reading meaning into every match. Flags in your eye line on every changeover. Plenty of players would ask their team to quietly manage it, keep the sessions private, control the access. Alex Eala goes the other way. She stays out. She signs. She waves. She blows kisses to the crowd. She keeps thanking them, in 2 languages, every single time somebody hands her a microphone. And that's why it keeps growing. It's a loop. They show up because she gives it back, and she gives it back because they show up. Now here's the part where you find out how big this has actually become, because it reached the very top. After Washington, the president of the Philippines, Ferdinand Marcos, posted a public message congratulating her on what he called yet another historic achievement, and then said this: "You continue to redefine what is possible for Philippine tennis and inspire countless young Filipinos to dream without limits." That's the head of state, about a tennis player, in a country that, 3 years ago, essentially did not follow tennis. And there's one more layer that I think gets missed in all the noise about crowds, so let me bring it back to the actual sport for a moment. Because none of this would matter if she couldn't play. In Washington, she didn't just win a title. Look at who she went through to get it. Zheng Qinwen, the Olympic champion. Leylah Fernandez, the defending champion there. Elina Svitolina, the 2nd seed. Naomi Osaka, a 4-time Grand Slam winner. Then Jessica Pegula in the final, coming back from a set down to win 4-6, 6-4, 6-love. That is not a lucky week. That's a gauntlet. Croft explained why she's so hard to handle, and it's a lovely bit of analysis. Alex is left-handed, which is rare. Most players spend their whole lives practicing against right-handers, so everything about a lefty feels mirrored and wrong. Croft compared her serve to Angelique Kerber's, not enormously fast, but placed beautifully, with heavy spin, which forces opponents to generate their own pace. And when players have to make their own power, Croft says, they start getting jittery. Then she added the sentence that should worry the rest of the draw. She said Alex has built up locker room respect and a certain aura that players don't want to face her now because of the record she's building. That's a real thing in tennis. Reputation arrives before you do. Opponents see your name in the draw and their week gets worse. So put the whole picture together. Tonight, on the biggest court in tennis, a 21-year-old from Quezon City walks out for an exhibition that officially means nothing, in front of a sold-out crowd, with tickets that started around $30, cheap enough that ordinary families could actually get in. The singles draw drops today, the tournament starts Sunday, and she arrives as the world number 18, in the form of her life, with a title in her bag and a reputation that makes opponents uncomfortable. Behind her is a crowd that fills practice courts on 3 continents, that made Naomi Osaka stop her cart and ask what was going on, that made a veteran analyst say she'd never seen anything like it, and that has made one of the biggest broadcasters in the sport reach for the name Pacquiao. Nobody saw this coming, not the tournament, not the sponsors, not the broadcasters, not the other players. Think about how many people whose actual job is to predict these things got it wrong. Tournament schedulers, who decide months ahead which players go on which courts. Ticketing departments, who model demand for a living. Broadcasters, who choose which matches to show and which to bury. Sponsors, who spend enormous sums trying to guess who the next global name will be. Every single one of those people has spreadsheets, data, decades of experience, and not one of them had a column for this. They had no column for it because there was nothing to base it on. When you build a forecast, you look at history. You ask what happened last time, and with the Philippines and tennis, there was no last time, no previous Filipino in the world's top 20, no Filipino Grand Slam quarterfinalist, no domestic tour, no tennis television deal, no pipeline of juniors coming through. If you'd asked a tennis executive 3 years ago to name the 10 countries most likely to produce a passionate new audience, the Philippines would not have been on the list. It probably wouldn't have been on a list of 50. So the whole sport was looking the other way. And while it looked the other way, something built itself quietly in the background. And I'd argue that's exactly why it's so good. This wasn't manufactured by a marketing department. Nobody sat in a meeting and decided the Philippines would become a tennis nation. There was no campaign, no launch, no budget, no clever hashtag dreamed up by an agency. It happened from the bottom up, through church groups and nursing networks and family group chats, because one young woman kept winning and kept saying thank you. That's the whole engine. 2 moving parts. She wins, and she thanks them. They show up, and they bring 3 more people next time. And you can tell it's real because of how untidy it is. Manufactured fandom looks polished. It has matching shirts and coordinated signs and a sponsor's logo in the corner. This looks like homemade cardboard with a joke on it that only half the stadium can read. It looks like a flag someone's had in a drawer since 1998. It looks like a nurse coming straight from a shift, still tired, standing at a practice court fence at 9 in the morning because her cousin said Alex was hitting on court 22. You cannot fake that. Nobody has ever successfully faked that. And here's what I think is the part people will only understand properly in about 10 years. Somewhere in the Philippines right now, in Quezon City, in Cebu, in Davao, in a small town nobody outside the province has heard of, there is a 7-year-old girl watching this on a phone. And for the first time in the entire history of that country, the sentence, "I want to be a professional tennis player," is not a silly thing for her to say out loud. That's what changes. Not the ranking, not the prize money, the size of what a child is allowed to imagine. Because a dream needs a precedent. Kids don't invent ambitions from nothing, they copy what they've seen. For generations, Filipino kids saw basketball courts and boxing gyms, so that's what they dreamed about, and those dreams produced real champions. Nobody dreamed about tennis, because there was nothing to point at. Now there's something to point at. There's a woman with a Filipino surname on the biggest court in the world, with the national flower in her hair and Tagalog written on her clothing. That's the precedent. That's the permission. And the phrase printed on her own gear says it better than I can. Kapag lumago, hindi na hihinto. Once it grows, it cannot be stopped. That was written before any of this happened. It reads now like a prediction. So let's talk about the next 2 weeks honestly, because I don't want to leave you with only the fairy tale. She might lose early. That's the truth. The women's game right now is brutally deep, and there is no easy round at a Grand Slam. She's played a long, punishing season. She just went out of the mixed doubles in the first round. Any of that could catch up with her on Sunday or Monday, in front of a stadium full of flags, and the disappointment would be instant and enormous and very public. But here is the thing I keep coming back to, and it's the reason I think this story is bigger than any scoreline. Toronto already answered the question. She lost there, and the crowd stayed and roared anyway. The tournament's own highlight video led with the fans rather than the winner. That tells you this crowd is not here for a result. They're here for the fact of her. They waited a very long time for someone to be there at all, and now that she is, they're not going to leave the moment the scoreboard turns. Which means, whatever happens on court, the takeover happens regardless. New York gets a lot of visitors. It's seen every kind of crowd. It thinks it can't be surprised. This is a city where people walk past film shoots without looking up, where nothing is impressive because everything has already happened here twice. Over the next 2 weeks, it's going to meet a few 100,000 people who have waited their entire lives for exactly this, and who intend to be as loud about it as the rules allow. And I suspect New York, a city built almost entirely by people who came from somewhere else, is going to recognize something familiar in that, and love it. So here's my question for you, and I want a real answer in the comments. Where in the world are you watching from? Not just the country, the city. Because I suspect the list under this video is going to look like a map of everywhere Filipinos have ever moved for work. Dubai, Toronto, Milan, Singapore, Auckland, Riyadh, ships in the middle of the Pacific. And honestly, I think that map is the whole story. That map is the reason she never plays an away match. And if you're going to be inside Arthur Ashe tonight, tell us what it sounds like in there. Not the score, the sound. I want to know whether the biggest tennis stadium on Earth can actually hold it, or whether it's going to leak out over the walls and across Queens like everybody suspects it will.